Hi, I'm Emily and welcome to the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I am a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia and thank you for joining me for episode 14. I have a few finished objects to share and some good progress on some exciting whips and also a small acquisition that is not very exciting, but I thought I would just save it until the end. So let's jump into my first finished object, and it is what I'm wearing. I finally finished my Lanark sweater, which is designed by Clow, and I knit this in drop soft tweed in the color Grizzly Bear. This has been on my needles for quite a long time, and it's definitely been on the podcast for at least the past couple of episodes, so I won't go into too much detail, but I'm glad it is finally a finished object that I can get some wear out of before the weather gets too warm. So as you can see, it is a quarter zip sweater and it is knit all over in half fisherman's rib, and I actually knit this flat instead of in the round. The yoke of the sweater is knit flat and then you swap to knitting in the round for the body and the sleeves, but when I did that I could see that there was quite a difference in how the stitch looked when I was knitting in the round, and I didn't like it as much, so I knit the panels flat and then seam it together at the end. The half fisherman's rib stitch does go by quite slowly and it can feel like it's a bit of a slog, and I definitely felt like I had to really motivate myself to pick this one up and actually work on it. In the last episode, I think I was about halfway through or just under halfway through the back panel, and I took it to knit night last Monday and managed to get through most of the rest of the back panel before I could start the ribbing. So that was a good bit of motivation to spur me on and make some good progress on this. So I managed to knit both of the sleeves in the next few days, and then over the weekend I had this blocking, and it did take a couple of days to dry, especially the collar because it's quite thick and a few layers of fabric to dry. And then at the start of this week I sat down and seamed it all together and wove in all of my ends. I'll stand up and show off the finished garment a little bit better. Overall, I am super pleased with how this has turned out. The sleeves are the perfect length. I can obviously cuff them up if I find that they're getting in the way, which I do quite often with sweaters when I'm just doing things that I don't want my sleeves to get into, but I don't like sleeves that are too short, so they're the perfect length for me. The body is quite long compared to what I usually knit. I think if I was knitting this in the round, I probably would have cropped it about this length, and I think I prefer that, but to be honest, I'm not sure if I have it in me to go in and shorten it just yet. If I was to go and shorten it, that means that I'd have to undo all of the seaming that I did in the sides and then re-seam it back up when I've taken the extra length out. So I'm just gonna wear it for a little while and see how I feel. I did knit the body and made sure when I was blocking it that it was the length specified in the pattern. So it is just the length that the pattern suggests, but obviously body length is something that can be quite personal and depends on your height and your personal preference. For the seaming of all the panels, for the first version that I made of this pattern, I just mattress stitched all the seams together and that worked quite well, but I was a bit worried about it potentially coming apart because this yarn is not the most tightly spun. I'm not sure if it's something to do with the tweed that's in it, but it definitely pulls apart quite easily and it's not too hard to break the yarn. So when I was mattress stitching the other version that I made, I did find a few times that the seam would break. I don't think it's had any issues since I've given it to my sister, or maybe she hasn't noticed, but for this one I thought I'd try something a bit different and I decided to crochet the seams together. So you can definitely see that there is a seam here, but to be honest, I think it looks just as good as a ready-to-wear garment would look. It looks really neat and I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. So when I split the front and the back panel, I added an extra selvage stitch on each side so I could crochet together, and I'm quite happy with how it looks. It's definitely not too bulky on the inside. To me, it just seems like a ready-to-wear sweater. Essentially, I just slip stitched all up the side of the garment, and I don't think it was much quicker necessarily than mattress stitching, but I think it's a bit neater and probably a little bit more sturdy. I think it adds that little bit of extra structure that is needed for this kind of yarn, because it has some alpaca content I've mentioned before. It's quite drapey and soft. I think having that little bit of extra structure in the seams definitely doesn't hurt. I've spoken more than enough about this project, so let's move on to my second finished object. The next thing I finished is the Jellyfish socks. This is a pattern by Charlotte Stone, and as soon as it was released, I knew I wanted to make a pair. These are for my boyfriend, and he has already been wearing them a few times. If I'm being honest, I took them out of the laundry basket to show you, so they won't come up too close. They actually don't look too bad. They have a bit of hair and things on them, but they're actually not looking too bad. This yarn has held up pretty well to the wear that it's had already, so that's a good sign. So I knit the largest size of these, which is 72 stitches, and they knit pretty much exactly to pattern. I don't think I really made any modifications, and I think they fit pretty well. In the last episode, I had finished one sock, and I think I was working on the second sock. I think I'd finished the color work, and I have to admit that I had to re-knit the foot of the second sock all over again. I was in a hurry for no particular reason. There was no deadline on these, but I was rushing and I knit the whole foot of the second sock at way too loose of a gauge. I think that just happens when I'm rushing. So it turned out way too long, and I couldn't just rip back the extra length because you could see that it was like way wider than the first sock, and it just didn't fit properly. So I did have to go back and like rip out basically the whole foot and re-knit it again, but lesson learned to just take my time, especially when there's actually no deadline on anything. I can just go at my own pace and get it done properly. But I think they are so cute. I'm really happy with how they turned out, and it was, yeah, another good practice for color work. I think I'm definitely getting better at tensioning color work, although for Magic Loop you can definitely see where the turn was. I need to somehow improve that, although it doesn't look too bad, especially when they're on, and they are just socks, so it's not really a big deal, but it's something that I would like to get better at. Because I had to buy 100-gram balls of each of the colors, I do have quite a lot left over of all of these contrast colors. One of them is already allocated to another whip, which I will share later, but the other ones I'm not too sure what I'll do with. I'll probably just keep them in my stash for another pair of socks, probably another pair of colorwork socks. But yeah, that is kind of the only thing with this yarn, is that you have to get 100 grams. I do think it's a really good choice for color work, but it is something to keep in mind if you don't want a huge amount of leftovers. Moving on into my works in progress. My first work in progress is something I'm really looking forward to sharing. It is a sweater that I've been working on, and the team at Unit Toronto reached out to me and asked if I would like to preview knit one of the patterns of their upcoming book called Memory Lane. The pre-orders for the book are open now, and you can also check out all of the designs on Ravelry. It was really hard to just pick one design to preview knit. There were at least 2 or 3 that I could see myself knitting, but I ended up going with the Maria sweater. I'll put in a picture of the sample, and it is knit in 2 strands held together. So there's one strand of a silk mohair and then another lace weight merino strand held together, and I really love the colors in this sample. Mine are quite different, but I also wanted something a bit higher contrast for the color work. I do really like how the color work looks, but as a personal preference, I think I just prefer having high contrast color work, and I think that you're putting in a lot of work, so it is nice to be able to see all of the details in the stitches. The other things that really drew me to this design are the folded hems, and also has a picot collar, which I couldn't really see in the sample photo until I got the pattern and started knitting my one, and I was like, this is making it even more me, and I really am glad that I chose this pattern. And finally, there's also beads added into the colorwork, which I've never seen before, and I've never done that before with my knitting. The designs in the book all have some kind of fun embellishment like ribbons or beads. There's lots of lacy designs, there's colorwork as well, so they all have something a little bit special. So I mentioned that the Maria sweater is knit in 2 strands held together. I was really struggling to find a good alternative. I didn't want to use a mohair, and I knew that a Suri alpaca, even though they are lace weight, they tend to be a little bit heavier and can throw off gauge, especially with me as a bit of a looser knitter. And also it would add quite a bit of cost that's just not really within my budget at the moment. I was having a look online to see what I could find that would be a good alternative, and I ended up with these 2 skeins. So this is the Juniper Moon Farms Herriot Fine yarn, which is 75% alpaca and 25% nylon. So it's technically like an alpaca sock yarn. It has the softness and the drape of a 100% alpaca yarn, so I don't think you can really notice the nylon in there, probably more so in the red yarn with the way that the dye has taken up. Maybe that's why it has such a nice color variation. I really ummed and ahed about what colors to go for. Like I said, I wanted something a bit higher contrast, and buying yarn online is always a bit of a risk. You never know exactly what the colors are going to look like. And definitely this red, if I had seen it in person, I probably wouldn't have bought it, especially when it's by itself. I think the orange really stands out, but when it's held with the grey and the colorwork, it tones it down a little bit more and you can't really see so much of the orange in there. So without further ado, here is where I'm up to so far on my Maria, and I'm really pleased with how the colorwork's looking. I think the high contrast of the colors really shows off the beautiful motif at the bottom. There's also some colorwork repeated on the end of the sleeve, so I'm looking forward to getting to work that as well. I'll try this on and then we can talk about where I'm at with this so far. So I am knitting the second size in this pattern on a 2.75mm needle, which is quite small. I am pretty close to gauge. I really wanted to be mindful of my gauge on this pattern because I think it is supposed to be fairly fitted across the bust, and also with the alpaca, I knew that that would grow quite a lot with blocking and wearing, so I wanted to make sure that my gauge wasn't going to be too loose. The pattern recommends a 3.5mm needle, so I had to size down quite a lot, but I'm quite happy with how my gauge looks. The stitches are definitely quite small, but it is a fairly see-through fabric, so I didn't want to go too much bigger. So here's a better view of the colorwork. You might be able to see the problem that I'm having. So the design does incorporate some increases along the side to give this beautiful A-line shape, which is very unusual. I've never knit anything like that before, but I think it gives a really nice, fun and romantic look. As you can see though, the colorwork does cinch in quite a lot. So like I said, I knit the body on 2.75mm needles, and then I actually went up to a 3.25 for the colorwork. I do knit colorwork English style versus the rest was all knit continental. So I know that my English colorwork knitting can be quite tight, and I even went up another needle size. So I originally started knitting this on 3mm needles and I could see the stitches were just way too small. So I ripped back the few rows that I had done and re-knit it, and yeah, I'm still having that problem. This hasn't been wet blocked yet, however, so there might be hope that I can save this. I did lightly steam block it just so the hem and everything would sit nice and flat, and yeah, I'm not sure. Hopefully blocking does fix that because I don't really like the weird balloon shape that this is giving at the moment. I'm also really hoping that the colors don't bleed when I block it. I think I'll just be careful and do it in quite cool water. I know I probably should have done that in my swatch. I just didn't really think about it at the time. Maybe I'll knit another really small swatch just to check that blocking won't cause this to bleed. But then if it does, like, I probably don't really have much of a choice but to wet block it anyway. So might just cross your fingers for me and hope that this all works out. This is the first pattern of Claudia's that I have knit, and I did find that it was written and maybe structured a bit differently than what I'm used to. I think you just get used to reading patterns in a certain way and using certain techniques, so I was a little bit thrown off by some things. The main one was using wrap and turns instead of German short rows. I have done wrap and turns in the past and I'm just never happy with how they look. Maybe I just need more practice with doing them, but I feel like German short rows are much quicker and much neater as well. I also find that I quite easily miss the wrap and turn to like pick it up when I'm going and resolving them. Whereas a German short row, it's very obvious because it looks like, it just looks like a short row to me. So I didn't really enjoy that. I did consider swapping them out, but I thought it would be a good practice. I think it's just kind of solidified that I will always now substitute German short rows instead of using wrap and turns. The other thing that I found a bit strange is on the side of the body. If I stand up, you can see that here there are some random purl stitches that just stop. So I could have been reading the pattern incorrectly. I'm not sure why they're there. I thought that it would continue all the way down and you would sew it up at the end as a bit of a faux seam or something like that, but it just stops. It's only for a few rows and then you start doing the increases for the body. I did send an email to ask if I was reading it incorrectly, what I was supposed to do with those stitches, and I didn't hear back. I'm sure they've been really busy with the pre-sale and everything for the book, and it's not that big of a deal, to be honest. So if I was to knit this again, I probably would just omit those. So for the collar and the hem, and I think also probably the cuff on the sleeves, you're supposed to drop down the silk mohair strand and just use the lace weight strand, which I didn't read until I got to that point, and I was a little bit annoyed by that because, like I said, it is quite costly to have those two strands held together for a design. So it would have been nice to include an alternative to say, if you're using one strand, use this size needle or go down a needle size. I think for beginner knitters, that would be really helpful advice. I just knew that I would need to go down a needle size anyway. I always do when I do folded hems, just to make them look a little bit neater, and especially because I knew that I was supposed to be using basically thinner yarn than I was. I went down to a 2.25mm needle instead of the 2.75, and yeah, I'm quite happy with how that looks. I think especially once it's all wet blotch, it will sit much nicer. The collar was also flaring quite badly until I steam blocked it, and it's still not perfect, but I think it will be fine once it's wet blocked. I'm also super happy with how the back neck sits. It's not riding too low, it's quite high up, and definitely will keep the back of my neck warm. So I'm really glad that that fits me, because that's something that I have noticed lately that can be something that really stops me wearing a garment if I find the back neck sits too low. The one thing with the collar, and this probably wasn't helped by the fact that I was using like not really the recommended yarn or needle size, is that it instructs you to pick up all the stitches and knit, which is very standard and what I'm used to, but then it tells you to bind off all the stitches and then sew it down. I've never been able to do that successfully without the head hole being really tiny and not being able to fit over my head. Sometimes I will knit the stitches down to the actual body, like the opening of the neck hole, and sometimes that works depending on the design and the yarn and the gauge. But to be honest, most of the time I just prefer to basically sew down the live stitches instead of knitting them down. It was just something that I noticed was a little bit different to what I'm used to doing, but I think if you're using the correct yarn and you're meeting the gauge using that, maybe it would have been okay, but definitely for this alpaca, there was not enough stretch in there. It's fine now, I can really easily get it over my head, but there was no way that that was going to work no matter how loosely I was going to bind off. This does have a fairly decent size range as well, which I was quite impressed by. I did ask if the designs are size inclusive, and I think most of them go up to a 150, 155 centimeter bust, and I think some of them are graded to even a little bit bigger depending on the design. I assume that means the bust circumference, not the finished circumference of the sweater, but at least for this design it is graded from a 76 centimeter bust to a 155 centimeter bust. It's obviously not the biggest size range in the world, but I think considering this is a printed book and there is obviously very limited space in a physical like printed pattern, I think that that is quite a decent size range compared to a lot of other publications like the Sadness Garns booklets. I think have very limited sizes. This one actually has 9 sizes, so it has quite a good increment of sizing as well. But overall, I love how this is going. I think the sleeve is really cute. I was a bit worried when I had just this that the sleeves were not going to fit, but there are so many short rows in here, which is good practice for my wrap and turns. But yeah, there's a huge amount of short rows to shape the sleeve cap, which I think just looks really soft and elegant, especially in this yarn. I know it will soften up a lot with blocking as well, but yeah, it's fine for me to wear against skin. And also the colorwork and the beading, I'm really excited to get to that. I'm kind of thinking to do like some amber beads in the colorwork. I think that would look really nice against this like rusty red color, and then maybe just some clear smaller ones to put along here. I'll have to go bead shopping when this is done, maybe take it with me, and then I can figure out what kind of placement I want to do and the colors. But I'm actually really looking forward to doing that. It's something different. Like I said, I've never done that in my knitting before. I'm looking forward to having another of these really soft and feminine blouses in my wardrobe. I definitely find that these like light fingering weight sweaters are what I reach for quite often in my wardrobe. If it's anything heavier than a DK, it's probably going to get worn once or twice a year. So like I said, the pre-orders for the book are open now. I'll also leave a link to the Ravelry page so you can have a look through all of the designs, and I'd love to hear what your favorite pick is out of them. On to my second work in progress, and I have another pair of socks. This is still the first sock on the needle, but if you have a keen eye, you might be able to tell that this is leftover yarn from the Jellyfish socks. I'm just using the rest of this light blue that I had. I think I had about 93 grams of this left, so I should have plenty to knit another pair of socks. And I'm pairing it with the teal color, which was the main color in the Jellyfish socks. I can't remember how much I had left of this, but I'm just doing contrast cuff and toe, so there should be plenty. So I am knitting the slip knit sock pattern, which is a free pattern from Patterns, and I am knitting these for my dad for Father's Day. I did ask him what he wanted for Father's Day. I said it doesn't have to be something knitted, and immediately he said socks. He just got a pair of socks for his birthday, which was only a few months ago, but apparently he really likes wearing them. I think because I can knit them to be a little bit looser, so when he's wearing them throughout the day or in the evenings, like they don't cut off the circulation in his leg. And also there's just something so special about having hand knit woolly warm socks in winter. So I'm knitting the larger size, which is 72 stitches, and the pattern actually recommends using a 2.75 millimeter needle, which for me and my gauge, there's no way that would be good for socks. It would be way too loose, and I don't think it would create a sturdy enough fabric. I have gone down to a 2.75 millimeter needle instead, which is still usually like bigger than what I would normally knit socks on. But I think maybe with the slip stitches, you just need a slightly bigger needle to account for like the pulling in of the slip stitches. I am knitting these on my favorite sock needles. These are the Addy Sock Wonders. So as you can see, one needle tip is slightly longer than the other, and it just creates a really nice like extra bit of room to grab onto when you're knitting on such a small circumference. I've had these for a while, and I used to knit socks on 2.5s, but my gauge is honestly just a little bit too loose for like regular vanilla socks when I'm using these. I wish they made them at a 2.25, but they don't, so I can hold out hope that one day they will, but yeah, for now I'm just enjoying being able to use them. Apart from that, I'm also changed up the pattern slightly. You can definitely see the slip stitches are really nice and prominent. In the pattern, it instructs you to slip every other round and then knit across. I have tried doing that, and I did that on another pair of socks before, and for both of them I ended up changing that to slipping 2 rounds and then knitting it on the third one. So just having that extra row of a slip just, I think, makes it a little bit more obvious that it's a pattern there. It just kind of looked like a weird stitch that you hadn't knit properly when I was following it as per what the pattern is written as. But apart from that, I'm knitting it pretty much to pattern. I think I did the 12 rounds of 2x2 ribbing, and then the slip stitch, heel flap and gusset, and I'm actually onto the toe now. It does just seem like a bit of a short foot, but I think it's just, again, the slip stitches. Yeah, I suppose when it's stretched out to be flat, it looks okay. It definitely shows how much these slip stitches pull in the fabric, but I think once it's blocked, it should be okay. And you know, worst case, I can rip out the toe, add a bit more length, and then we'll be okay. So I cast this one on Tuesday or Monday, so I've only been knitting this for like 2 or 3 days, and I managed to get through it really quickly, which I'm quite surprised about. I do kind of just want to get these off the needles, to be honest. I have been knitting quite a lot of socks lately, and I actually have another pair of socks on the needles as well, but these will just take priority until they're finished, so they're done in time for Father's Day. Worst case, if I really don't want to knit the second one, I will just give him one sock and then tell him he'll get the second one whenever it's done. I don't think he'll mind that too much. The other pair of socks I have on the needles is actually a secret test knit, so I can't show you the actual socks, but I can show you the yarn. So I am doing the secret test knit for Laura from Sunday Morning Knits. She has a really good podcast and also a really beautiful Instagram feed. So I think the pattern will be released next month as a free pattern, and it will be in collaboration with an indie dyer called Paisley Knits. When Laura reached out to ask me if I would like to test for her, I knew exactly the yarn that I would want to use. So I am using this Hedgehog Fibres twist sock yarn in the color Ghost. It is a 80% BFL and 20% nylon sock yarn, and it has a really high twist to it, so I'm hoping that means that it will be quite sturdy. You can also feel that the BFL is a little bit more toothy than like a really soft merino, which is what I have normally knit hand-dyed socks with. I am then just using this undyed mini from Dyeing to Knit along with the lilac, and I think it's a really beautiful color combination. I have finished the first sock, and that was the requirement for the test. We had a whole month to knit one sock, so that was very generous, and I've managed to finish that. I would like to finish the second sock before the end of the month, but honestly I'm not sure if I will reach that. I think I'm about halfway through the gusset decreases, and it is patterned, so it's not just like plain knitting all the way around. If I manage to finish my dad's socks before then, maybe I will get that done, but I also don't want to force myself to work on socks. Like we found out with the jellyfish socks, if I rush them, I end up doing something silly and then have to go back and fix it. So they'll get done when they get done. But yeah, they're a really beautiful pattern, and I'm looking forward to being able to share those with you. So those are all of the projects I have on the go at the moment. I have one small acquisition. It's not the most exciting, but I will quickly share it anyway and start brainstorming some ideas for what to knit with it. So I went to the charity shop and I managed to find this bag of white cotton yarn for only $8. There's about 270 grams of yarn in here, and to me it looks like a fingering weight yarn, like maybe even a light fingering. I did a little swatch with this on 2.5 millimeter needles, and it's quite see-through still, so I'm not sure exactly what I want to make with this. I have envisioned another 9 PM tank, which is designed by Tiff-Knit. I've knit 2 of them already in the Knitting for Olive cotton merino, and I get a lot of wear out of those during the summer, and I really wanted a white one. I'm not sure this is the best shade of white to go with my complexion. It's very cool and like a bright white. I picked up the yarn anyway because I'm pretty sure it is 100% cotton just based on the feel of it. So I could potentially over dye this quite easily. Saying that, I would really like a 9 PM tank in white. I have a few flowy trousers and skirts and things that I think need like a nice white tank top to go with for summer. So I might just knit it anyway and see how I go with the color. I can always over dye the piece if I really don't like how it looks. I think, yeah, like I say, because it is 100% cotton, that shouldn't be too hard. I'm not the biggest fan of knitting or wearing 100% cotton. I do like the cotton merino from Knitting for Olive, or something that has a little bit of wool in there to give it a little bit more softness and elasticity. This is quite a hard yarn. Blocking has softened it up a little bit, and I do think it's one of those yarns that as you like move it and wear it a little bit more, it will soften up as well. It doesn't have a huge amount of drape to it, so I think a garment like the 9 PM tank that is quite fitted will probably be a little bit better. I think something that's meant to have a bit more flow and drape to it will kind of like hang a little bit awkwardly. So I think it does have to be something that is a bit more close fitting. Apart from the 9 PM tank, I've also been considering knitting the City Top by Tori Knits. I think this pattern was released a few weeks ago and it immediately went to my favorites. I really love the silhouette of it. I also really like the twisted rib detail that goes down the side. And she has also launched a dress pattern to go with it, which looks amazing. I don't see myself knitting the dress, but I think the people who have look really good in it and I really like it. I was just really drawn to the neckline and the silhouette of the top. It is another quite fitted top that I am not sure if it will go as well with 100% cotton. I think it might be one of those designs that does need a little bit of elasticity in it from a wool or a similar fiber, so I have some decisions to make. I think I'm honestly leaning more towards the 9 PM tank for this, but if you have any other suggestions on some summer tops that would look good in a fingering weight cotton, I would love to hear them. So that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you very much for watching until the end. I hope you found it a little bit inspiring, and I would love to hear what you have been working on recently. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!